A former director of the British Council in Nigeria, David Roberts, has called on Nigeria to reject the recent report by the International Monetary Fund, IMF, which projected that the country would drop from the first to the fourth largest economy in Africa this year. The fund, in its recent World Economic Outlook, as reported by Bloomberg, estimated Nigeria's gross domestic product (GDP) at $253 billion, behind South Africa with $373 billion, Egypt $348 billion, and Algeria $267 billion. However, the former British envoy to Nigeria said the country should rely more on data from its statistics rather than foreign agencies because the domestically gathered information is likely to be more accurate. Well, I'm now joined by Dr. Muda Yusuf, the CEO, Center for Promotion of Private Enterprise, CPPE. Thank you so much, Doctor, for joining me today.
Thank you very much, Perpetual. Thanks for having me.
All right, so looking at this, I mean, it's interesting to hear this from a former director of British Council, knowing how, some Nigerians would jump on anything from the abroad, whether it's data or finished goods. What do you make of this?
Well, I think what he has said is very correct. It's all about, having confidence in ourselves and having confidence in our institutions. Because our own institutions have much better access to data, more current data. They have better access to information around what is unfolding in the economy, in terms of economic activities, in terms of economic reforms, and the kind of outlook that all these reforms portends for the country. If you Google Nigeria GDP, you will see different figures, actually. But most of the figures are well over 400 billion US dollars. That was as at, 2023. So we cannot just drop from about 450 billion or 430 billion dollars in 2023 now to 253 billion in 2024. I mean, that is, of course, a gross underestimation of what the size of our economy is. So for me, I don't think this is something that we need to reckon with that much. So I agree with the diplomats that made this comment that we shouldn't bother so much about it. Our economy is doing well. I mean, partially, our GDP growth as at the fourth quarter last year was about 3.4%. Not many economies are doing that well. And between then and now, of course, we have had some challenges around the cost of living, cost of production, and things like that. But all of these are outcomes of current reforms. It's all about resetting the economy. And things are beginning to take shape. We are increasingly now relying less on importation of petroleum products. We are trying to reform the foreign exchange market.
Okay.
A lot of inflows are coming into the economy. So the outlook is not as bleak as has been painted by the IMF.
All right, let me come in here. So, I mean, in essence, what you're saying is we should, totally dismiss, this particular projection from the IMF.
Yes, it's not something to reckon with that much. And what is even more important as far as economies are concerned, it's not even so much the GDP. It's about the welfare of the people. It's about jobs. It's about employment. If you listen to, many of the assessment of economies in the advanced economies, they don't talk so much about GDP. They talk more about employment. They talk more about, how the welfare of the people, housing deficits, the quality of infrastructure, how well are people feeding, what is the standard of their living in terms of all of that. For me, I think that is much more important. Even to the average Nigerian, if you talk about GDP to them, GDP is improving, GDP is dropping, it doesn't mean anything to them.
All right, let me come in here. I like what you said.
Yes.
Go ahead. You can land on your thought.
No, what they want to see is an improvement in their standard of living. Full stop.
All right.
GDP doesn't mean much if it doesn't translate to improve their standard of living. So we should focus more on what we call the standard of living index or human development index. And if you look at our performance on that index, we are not doing well at all.
So at the end of the day, I mean, from what you just said now, it feels like we still need to pay attention to the GDP. However, beyond that, you're looking at, things like infrastructure, welfare of the people, and employment. We know that these things, when we look at these three things you've talked about, Nigeria isn't doing so well. So what more needs to be done to improve this? Because at the end of the day, when these things are addressed, automatically the GDP will pick up.
Yes, I mean, well, the government is already on course as far as some of these things are concerned, because we need to address issues of productivity, for instance, because you cannot improve the well-being of the people. You can't, make the economy more inclusive if productivity is low. And productivity has a very strong relationship with the quality of your infrastructure. We need to look at our industrialization. It's very difficult to industrialize, to ramp up production if you don't have supporting infrastructure, especially power and logistics. Those things are very important. Then you also need to focus more on building an economy that is inclusive, because increasingly we are seeing a widening of gap between the rich and the poor. Inequality is becoming a major issue. The level of poverty is increasing. I mean, we have seen that in the past, when we had very good performance on account of GDP, and the people are getting poorer. We are having more unemployment. So we need to address, some of these policy issues, but more importantly, the structural issues, and how we can use fiscal and monetary policies to ensure that those at the bottom of the pyramid are not left behind. Those things are very important.
All right.
Because the more people you leave behind in the economy, the more you create problems of social instability, the more you create problems of insecurity. So as much as possible, we should bring everybody on board, at least to ensure that people have basic access to basic things of life. That is more important than the GDP.
Okay, thank you for that. Well, I'd like to take you back to the projection. Now, IMF projected a 2.9% growth for Nigeria in 2023. However, according to NBS report for fourth quarter 2023, which you alluded to, Nigeria's GDP grew by 3.46%. That was in the fourth quarter of 2023. But when you look at it on an annual basis, Nigeria's growth in 2023 was actually 2.74%. Now, that fell short of the IMF's projection. Don't you think that's some reason to probably take these projections seriously, and rather than be condemned to them, we make effort to change the tide? What do you think?
No, the government is aware that we have challenges in the economy. The government is quite aware. I mean, the last few months have been very challenging for production, for investors. And it is investment activities that actually drive the GDP. The government is quite aware of that, and that is why some of these reforms have been put in place to be able to ensure that you have, stronger macroeconomic fundamentals, because you can't build something on nothing. You need to have the fundamentals right, fundamentals around, bringing down your inflation, ensuring macroeconomic stability, strengthening our fiscal consolidation aspirations, ensuring that we have an economy that is more inclusive, addressing the challenges of SMEs, promoting energy security. These are a combination of things that the government has been trying to put in place. So no one is in any doubt as to the fact that there are challenges in the economy. And last year was particularly very challenging because of the shocks of the reform. When you have major reforms, normally you have shocks. And those shocks, of course, in the short term, had some negative impact on the welfare of the citizens and even on investors. But we are beginning to recover from that. And that is why I would say that, perhaps we have gone past the worst of the challenges in the economy. Going forward, the trajectory, I think, is such that the future will be much better than the past. That is what I think. So the government, I'm sure, is conscious of that. Of course, there are still a lot to be done. That is why consultation is very important. Consultation with stakeholders, to understand what the issues are with the economy, particularly from investors, and particularly also to ensure that you have more foreign direct investment to complement whatever we are having with the local investors. But I'm sure that progress is being made. From the data you read out, there's something to show that the economy is in contraction. There's something to show that the economy is heading for recession. So these are things that are positive, and I think we should be more positive about the economy going forward.
All right, so taking a general look at gross domestic product, at current price, it's actually defined based on the GDP in national currency converted to US dollars using market exchange rates, looking at the yearly average. Now, this means that improvements in Nigeria's currency can and actually should set Nigeria up for more growth. Now, beyond the quick fixes and some form of administrative management we have seen so far in the foreign exchange market, what are your recommendations for long-term solutions? Because it feels like the Naira is probably beginning to depreciate all over again.
No, what is important is to have a framework to ensure minimum volatility, to have a framework for stability in the exchange rate. Now, I've heard the CBN talk about the fact that the CBN wasn't going to defend the Naira and that it is willing buyer, willing seller. But what I would like to suggest is that we should not leave the Naira completely to a floating regime. What I thought we had adopted was a managed floating regime of the currency. And that is what is done in most economies. You don't leave your economy completely to free market. You intervene in the market depending on the prevailing circumstances. Sometimes we intervene to make foreign exchange supply to the market. Sometimes we intervene to buy from the market when there is evidence that there's a lot of foreign exchange liquidity. So depending on the circumstances, the CBN has a responsibility to intervene. One of the main objectives of having your reserves, apart from paying your debts and settling some obligations that is due to governments, whether states, local or federal, foreign currency obligations. One of the main objectives of the reserve is also to support the currency. So depending on how the situation is swinging, the pendulum is swinging, the CBN has a responsibility to define a corridor within which to ensure that the currency doesn't swing beyond. And we can do that, and I think it's possible. If you have proper econometric modeling, you can come up with a range, something like an asymmetric corridor within which we should not allow the currency to be swinging. Otherwise, if you have this kind of volatility, it can cause a reversal of the gains that we have seen in the last few weeks.
Let me come in here.
Let
me come in here, Doctor.
It can lead to more people now losing confidence, and confidence, has a way of fueling speculative activities. We'll be back to square one.
All right. Now, beyond, some of those things that the CBN is doing or that the monetary authority is doing, what more can we do to ensure that, we have, more liquidity in the foreign exchange market? Some persons are talking about production, boosted exports, and all of those things. I'd like you to also, comment or talk about those other things we can do beyond what the CBN or, let's say, the monetary authority is doing.
Well, I've said what the CBN should do to minimize volatility. That is extremely very important. That is having the right framework in the foreign exchange market. The other thing we need to do, and which we are already doing anyway, is to be able to ensure that we minimize import dependence, through a structured, sustainable strategy of import substitution. An example is what is happening already with our petroleum products. Up until now, we spend about 30% of our foreign exchange on importation of petroleum products. Now, with the coming on stream of the Dangote refinery, even though we have not started seeing the production yet of PMS, but we are beginning to see the impact on diesel, we are beginning to see the impact on aviation fuel. So the more of this import substitution that we do, the lesser the pressure on the foreign exchange market. You can also extend that to other sectors, supporting non-oil exports, for instance, so that you can have more exports, supporting even the growth of oil exports, oil outputs. All of these things are in the fiscal policy domain. They are not within the CBN domain. So they are within the purview of the fiscal authorities to ensure that we ramp up our production in oil outputs by ensuring that we have minimum this oil theft problem, insecurity. Only recently, the president has put in place some initiatives to improve incentives for investors in the oil and gas. That kind of incentives can also spur a lot of investment, because the more FDI we have in the economy, the more foreign exchange we also have, and that also helps to stabilize the currency. So there's a whole lot that can be done around investments, both to boost earnings of foreign exchange.
Dr. Muda, if you can hear me, I think I'll...
Yes.
Okay, so just before we close, I would like to go back to some of the things the former British envoy alluded to, and I'm sure that you've mentioned some of them, but I'll just say these things in his words. He said, fuel importation is down by 57%, local refining is up by 12%, and will explode when the Dangote and Port Harcourt refineries kick off fully. You no longer spend 1.5 billion naira a month floating the naira. Now, I want to ask you, if this momentum is sustained, how long, in a matter of, I wanted to put this in a matter of, maybe weeks or even months or years, if this is sustained, how long will it take us to reach, that promised land, really?
Well, promised land that's a long journey. What we want to see is an improvement in the currency stability, the strengthening of the naira, the creation of more jobs and all of that. It's an incremental thing. It is very difficult to define a terminal date for reaching the promised land. It's a long journey. Even the advanced economies are also struggling to grow. But what is important is to ensure steady growth, to ensure that steadily we ease poverty, steadily we address all the key business environment issues, we address our insecurity issues, our infrastructure deficit, our macroeconomic stability. Those are the key fundamentals that we should begin to address. And the more we make progress in that front, the closer we get to what you have described as the promised land. I think that is the way to go.
All right. Thank you so much, Dr. Muda Yusuf, CEO, Center for Promotion of Private Enterprise. Thank you so much for your time on the show and for sharing your thoughts with us.
Thank you very much. Thank you.